Well, thank you. It is truly an honor and a pleasure to be here today. And let me tell you that after 2 years in Washington, it is truly a delight to be back at Berkeley. The class of 2011 has a special place in my heart. I taught many of you introductory economics before starting my adventure in Washington. You were hitting your stride here at Berkeley, just as I was trying to find my footing in the White House. And then after I came back, I had the chance to teach many of you again this spring, before you head off in adventures of your own. Well, these days, many people like to disparage academia and the so-called ivory tower. They like to draw a distinction between what goes on at a university like Berkeley and what happens in the real world. Well, I have now seen the real world, and I can tell you that there is no better preparation for policymaking, problem solving, and just living a productive life than spending time at Berkeley. This is true for a faculty member, and it's true for our students. The intellectual values, knowledge, and skills that one learns at Berkeley are exactly what's most needed in Washington, business, and everyday life. Today I want to talk about how Berkeley has prepared you to face the adventures ahead of you, just as it helped to prepare me to face mine. And reflecting on what one learns from Berkeley is a chance for me to give your family and friends a sense of what life is like for a Berkeley economics major or an economics faculty member. Now, one thing that Berkeley teaches anyone who comes here is the importance of hard work. You know, a new study claims that college students aren't working as hard as they used to in the good old days. Well, I can't speak for other schools or for other departments, but I can tell you that Berkeley econ majors work incredibly hard. My husband and I just taught an advanced undergraduate class that had close to 100 pages of reading each week, frequent problem sets, a paper, and 2 grueling exams. The material was so hard, it made our heads hurt just to teach it. Yet the students mastered the material, and some even thanked us afterwards for pushing them so hard. Now, faculty members in our department also work incredibly hard. All of my colleagues' teaching and research awards that Professor Roland just described don't come from long lunches and taking summers off. There's no substitute for hours and hours in front of a computer and endless thinking about the best way to tackle a research question or to explain a difficult concept to the class. Now, my time in the White House certainly put that Berkeley work ethic to the test. People working for the president like to say that White House years are like dog years. 2 can feel like 14. And indeed, one of the most frequent questions I used to get from friends and acquaintances when I was in Washington was, "So, are you having fun?" And I used to say something cryptic like, "I'm sure I will have had fun in retrospect." But the truth is, every inch of my body wanted to scream, "Are you out of your mind?" The economy is in free fall. I haven't had a full night's sleep since the president nominated me. And dealing with Larry Summers is, believe it or not, the easy part of my job. Working in the White House was simply the hardest thing I've ever done. But those 2 years were also the most important and meaningful of my life. Helping to formulate economic policy during the worst recession since the Great Depression was a responsibility greater than any I could have imagined having. And I firmly believe that the policies that we helped to put into place, such as the Recovery Act, financial regulatory reform, and the health reform legislation, have already made a positive difference in the lives of millions of American families. I suspect that you will find something similar in your own lives. The most meaningful and memorable things that you do will not always be fun. Starting a business, getting a graduate degree, or raising a child can be exhausting, frustrating, and sometimes even painful. Just ask the mothers who gave birth to you. But your time at Berkeley has shown you that working hard allows you to accomplish great things. You have learned to set aside short-run fun for long-run rewards. More hours on Facebook may be entertaining, but they will never be able to compete with the pride and the happiness that you're going to feel when you walk across this stage. A second thing that being at Berkeley teaches you is the importance of asking questions and listening to others. Nothing characterizes this great university better than our love of respectful but fierce intellectual debate. Now, the undergraduate course that David and I taught this spring had more than 200 students. But even so, we had wonderful class discussions. We would push the students to critique a reading or derive a model rather than just tell them what we thought the right answer was. And there were times when students made comments or asked questions that were so perceptive, they left us speechless. David and I would often share a look that said, "Why didn't we think of that?" Well, such intellectual exchange is essential in good policy making. Now, the press enjoyed telling stories of how contentious the Obama economics team was, and it is true that meetings in the West Wing could often feel like a particularly rowdy seminar in Evans Hall. But President Obama found it helpful to have different sides of an issue argued passionately. Now, sometimes the discussions could get so frank and freewheeling that it was a little too easy to forget that one of the participants was the leader of the free world. And this led to one of my most embarrassing moments in the White House. We were having a spirited discussion in the fall of 2009 about whether the president should call for even more fiscal stimulus. And at one point, the president repeated someone else's argument that given how large the unemployment problem still was and how limited the resources were likely to be, perhaps there was just no point in pushing for more stimulus. Without thinking, I shot back, "That is oh so wrong." The president raised an eyebrow and good-naturedly said, "It's not only wrong, it's oh so wrong." I had clearly crossed a line. But the outcome of that frank debate was much better economic policy. The president did endorse a number of additional actions, including more aid to the unemployed and to financially strapped state and local governments. Not everything that he proposed made it through Congress, and the additional help was not nearly as much as we needed. But the evidence suggests that those additional measures helped to raise employment by more than 500,000 jobs. That's 500,000 American families who don't have to worry about whether they'll lose their home or have to tell their promising high school senior that there just isn't enough money to send them to college. It seems to me that the rest of Washington would function much better if they'd learned the Berkeley lesson of respectful debate. Too often, politicians question each other's motives and principles rather than their ideas and their policies. As policymakers face incredibly difficult issues such as the budget deficit, taxes, and the future of Medicare, they are going to need to argue and debate as they have never done before. But they should take a lesson from the Bipartisan Fiscal Commission or the group of 5 senators from both parties who are working together to actually draft budget legislation. If the debate stays substantive and civil, bipartisan agreement is actually possible, even in this highly charged environment. Well, respectful debate and questioning is a value that will serve you well in your future lives. The essence of creativity is a willingness to challenge accepted ways of doing things. You're more likely to succeed in business, come up with a brilliant new invention, or shake up a government agency if you continue to question and debate the conventional wisdom. A third, and perhaps the most fundamental lesson an econ major learns at Berkeley is the importance of evidence. An econ test rarely asks you to just spit back some facts. It asks you to analyze an issue and to defend your conclusion with economic diagrams and empirical evidence. An economics paper is almost never a term paper that just summarizes an existing literature. It's an analytical essay that asks you to critique a study or suggest a new test of an important question. Well, Berkeley faculty members excel in many types of economic research, but one of the strongest research areas of our department is creative, convincing empirical work. Berkeley economists don't just say what they think is true, they gather the evidence to figure out what actually is true. And my colleagues have come up with brilliant studies of the impact of aid programs in Africa, or the effect of immigration on wages of American workers, or the relationship between tax policy and inequality. The studies are highly respected for their painstaking data collection, creative use of natural experiments, and frontier statistical methods. This respect for evidence was also critical in Washington. With President Obama, you didn't win an argument by having the loudest voice or the slickest political calculation. You won by having the best evidence on your side. And the Council of Economic Advisors became a research factory modeled on the Berkeley Economics Department. Indeed, we hired 3 of our fabulous Berkeley graduate students and 1 of our young professors just to make sure that the CEA was as strong as it could be. When policy issues came up, CEA economists searched the literature for the studies and carefully evaluated the evidence. When the necessary studies hadn't been done, they did journal quality research, but on a Washington, I needed it yesterday timeline. The council prepared presentations for President Obama that included regressions, survey data, and pages of graphs. My White House colleagues would sometimes suggest that maybe I should water the presentations down to make them more accessible. But I always found that the president appreciated the technical details. You should have seen the jaws drop the day in the Oval Office when I was showing him a scatter plot and the president asked me a question about one of the extreme observations. There he was, not only following the technical material, but actually critiquing it. Now, Congress is not always as attentive to careful research as it should be. Some policymakers don't care how good a study is as long as they agree with its conclusion. But in the end, I think good evidence tends to carry the day. And I'll give you one example. Every one of us knows that we have a terrible budget deficit and we're going to have to take aggressive action to get it under control. But there's a lot of debate about the best way to go about reducing the deficit, and especially when's the right time to take those actions. Now, a year ago, many policymakers were claiming that trimming the budget deficit immediately would be good for the recovery and help to bring the unemployment rate down. Now, your students will tell you that this claim goes against basic economic theory that holds that fiscal expansion, not fiscal contraction, will lower unemployment. But the one prominent study on the issue, which involved only a superficial look at the data, appeared to find that fiscal contractions actually stimulated the economy. But then a new study was done by a team of scholars that looked at the issue much more carefully. They identified fiscal austerity programs in 15 countries over 30 years using a careful reading of the policy record. The researchers then looked at what happened to output and employment after countries undertook programs to reduce their deficits. Output most definitely fell, and unemployment most definitely rose. Well, this study has had a big impact on how countries around the world are thinking about dealing with their deficits. Everyone agrees that it's essential that we pass a plan very quickly that specifies how deficits will be reduced over time. But there's increasing support for the notion that the actual spending cuts and tax increases should occur only gradually as the recovery strengthens. Well, this fundamental respect for the evidence is a Berkeley value that every policymaker should have. And it's one that will serve each of you well as you take on new challenges. So, for example, if you go into business, I hope you will never follow your gut. Instead, do the research, talk to smart people, and follow the evidence. When you're deciding what charity to give to, what car to buy, or the best medical care for your child, I hope you won't be swayed by flashy ads, word of mouth, or what you heard on Oprah. Instead, read everything you can find and make choices based on the facts. And if, as I dearly hope, some of you go into government service and even into politics, don't just think what your colleagues tell you to think, or even what you learned in college. Read the memos, ask the hard questions, and insist on the strongest evidence. Well, today I've been extolling Berkeley's intellectual values, because I think all of us who've been privileged to spend time at Berkeley have been given a gift. We've learned the value of hard work, respectful questioning, and the power and importance of good evidence. And these are exactly the intellectual values that are essential to good policymaking, success in business, path-breaking research, and just about anything you want to do with your lives. But there's another value that also infuses Berkeley that may be even more important, and that's a deep concern for the world around us. You feel this value every time you walk through Sproul Plaza. There are always hundreds of people working to raise money for some cause, protesting some injustice, or advocating for some policy. Now, you and I may have different opinions on the particular issues, but I think we can't help but celebrate the fact that Berkeley students care enough to be out there working for what they believe. This is a university whose heart is every bit as big and strong as its head. Well, my greatest wish for you, the class of 2011, is that you take the incredible intellectual skills and values that you've learned and combine that with that passionate Berkeley heart. Use the gifts that you've been given to build a better future for yourselves, for your families, and especially for a country that is depending on you. Thank you.